And now, another moment in the history of Stafford County.
The English colonists who arrived at Jamestown in May of 1607 are historically depicted as a tough and courageous community of settlers who were able to survive because of their strong will and determination. But in truth, their survival was due in no small part to one thing: these people. The Patawomeck Indians were the earliest inhabitants of Stafford County and can trace their lives here to somewhere around 1300 AD when they settled along the south bank of the Patawomeck River. That's roughly the same time as the last Crusaders were returning to Europe. One of the more prominent Patawomeck settlements in Stafford was on Patawomeck Creek at Indian Point, not far from Marlborough Point. That village was occupied more or less continuously until just before the arrival of the English at Jamestown. It was then that the Patawomeck Indians moved to a new site not far away in the 1500s. That was the village John Smith visited, and it was near where Pocahontas was kidnapped, but its exact location remains a mystery. Nevertheless, the older site at Indian Point still remains until this day. The Patawomeck spoke an Eastern Algonquin language. Some modern-day members of the tribe still speak this language.
Wingapo Cheschame, Werewants, Krenapo, near Nokomis,
near Tisimacog,
near Opaque, Miquon,
near Natashno, Peru.
Kina,
Kina.
The language did not survive because of the annihilation that occurred in 1666. The colonial governor gave the order to wipe out those pesky Indians, and it was true, the Indians were causing a lot of trouble, because their land was being taken. But our tribe was always helpful and got the colonists to adjust to and adapt to this very foreign environment to them. And in doing that, we taught them how to plant, how to fish and hunt, and how to survive on this land. In doing that, words from our Patawomeck language worked their way into the English language.
Wingapa, Natadowings, Natashna, Peru.
Cutadowings Kier Tismacog,
Sequilum, Sakir,
Wingan, Sakir,
Manushan,
Ana.
Now, I call this the Patawomeck language. Many of the academicians will call it the Powhatan language. But by virtue of the fact that we were non-nomadic and lived on the river over here and traded with everybody, all other Indian tribes, white settlers, so on and so on, we had to learn a language that the other people understood. So it was probably a mixture of several languages.
In the late 1500s, the Patawomecks became part of a far larger political organization called the Powhatan Confederacy. The Confederacy included 30 tribes and, according to Thomas Jefferson's Notes on Virginia, covered an area of roughly 8,000 square miles. The buildings in the Patawomeck settlement were sturdy longhouses built on heavy timbers. These dwellings were 50 to 60 feet long and 26 feet wide. Other buildings, equally rugged, were circular. They were covered in animal hides for protection against the elements.
Our villages were in palisades, which were kind of like forts, and I'm sure, maybe, later years when they did build forts, they built them on, with the idea of what we had. We do have some pictures that are available over there that would show you exactly, what our villages, look like. Everything was built around. It was built on the water. We, of course, were water people, and, they were built, as close to the water as they possibly could, do things for traveling purposes, going from village to village, fishing, that type of thing, and trading with other villages.
One of the unique characteristics of a Patawomeck town was its fortifications. Just like many towns in Europe, it had a wall. In this case, it was a wooden palisade with a moat. Yes, a moat. Being so accessible by water, and with potential raiders from other tribes a constant threat, the Patawomecks invested heavily in defense. The economy of the Patawomecks was based on agriculture. In other words, they were farmers. Many people are surprised by this, but there are extensive references in several histories to large corn crops. Captain John Smith, for example, traded with the Patawomeck for their corn. The Patawomecks followed a seasonal pattern of hunting and gathering, but in winter, when their gardens were dormant and fishing was less productive, they moved into the interior and relied on stored food as well as whatever game they could procure. Waterways were viewed as a source of food and transportation.
Right. Well, I'm sure they, not being familiar with with the land, the type of land and everything. The areas that we basically had our villages in were marsh and wetlands. So they weren't familiar with growing. We grew our own, food to eat. Hunted fish, and of course, when we did, kill game, we used every bit of it. We used the hides for clothing, for covering, blankets, that type of thing. When we fished, and we used the bones for sewing instruments, that type of thing.
Corn or maize, introduced into the region from Mexico, grew well in Virginia. It fulfilled the Indians' nutritional needs, enabling them to thrive and become more populous. Captain John Smith observed that Indian men spent most of their time hunting, fishing, and engaging in wars, while the women and children made mats, baskets, and pottery, and raised the crops upon which their villages depended. He described the Patawomecks as generally tall and straight, with black hair and dusky complexions, and noted that the men rarely had beards. He said that the natives were exceptionally strong and agile and tolerated even the worst weather. But there are many subtle and important differences between the Indians and the Europeans. The Patawomecks considered land merely a part of the earth, like the sky, water, and the air, and therefore open to use by everyone. So the European concept of owning land was foreign to them. The two cultures also have vastly different views of religion. The Patawomecks, while open to the idea of a Christian deity, were reluctant to renounce their own gods. Although both cultures viewed accumulated wealth as a symbol of social status, they had a much different concept of inheritance. For example, Patawomecks passed their birthright through the female line rather than the male. Archaeological evidence reveals very little of the early Patawomeck people. Excavations in the 1930s unearthed 134 individuals now kept in the Smithsonian Institution. But other than that, little is known beyond what is revealed in English histories. The Patawomeck tribe, despite cruel treatment by the English colonists, still exists today. Members of that tribe live and work among and alongside the citizens of Stafford County every day. The state has recognized the Patawomecks as an official Indian tribe in Virginia, but as of the end of 2013, they have received no federal recognition. Still, had it not been for the compassionate outreach of the Patawomecks to the settlers at Jamestown, the history of that fated colony would be very different, and so would the history of Stafford County. And there you have it, in a Stafford Minute.